Hey folks, today we're going to talk about a really amazing lawsuit. It's the state of Missouri and the state of Louisiana filed a lawsuit against the federal government for suppression of free speech. It's a case that's going to talk about kind of the states' rights, the federal rights, free speech, and these stories about COVID and how it originated. Suppression of Hunter Biden's laptop information. About election information suppression. And it's going to be one of these lawsuits that's going to have a very big impact on how the social media companies suppress speech that the government wants it to suppress. Okay? It's going to be a great episode. I'm so excited to talk about this lawsuit. It is so interesting, and the biggest problem today is going to be to get me to stop talking, okay? Because I could talk about this for a whole semester, okay? That is how intricate this is, how important it is, and how it's going to shape the future, okay? So what happened here is last year, the attorney generals for the states of Missouri and Louisiana got together and they filed a federal lawsuit against the federal government, naming Joe Biden, the president, and Dr. Fauci and the Department of Homeland Security as defendants. So, obviously a big deal here. You got these states against the federal government entities. And then what we're going to, discuss real quick here is the allegation. The allegations are that the federal government, specifically Joe Biden and Vice President Harris, suppressed speech, and they forced Facebook and Twitter, the New York Post, and all sorts of entities to, they forced them to hide stories that were, detrimental to them. Stories about the, Hunter Biden, stories about election fraud, stories about the COVID and where it started specific. I can't say that word specifically, so I'm going to stop saying it. Okay. So, in particular, there were stories about, that the COVID may have started in a lab and it could have leaked from a lab. The virus could have leaked from a lab, whether intentional or not. And that's what started it, right? So there's evidence that the federal government was suppressing that information, right? And now it's no longer suppressing it because then all these other articles came out and studies and whatnot that said it's possible, we cannot rule out the possibility that it started from a lab, So, so now that comes the lawsuit, they, and it's going to be, depending on how this goes, right, it's going to shape how government officials can communicate with social media companies in terms of how to flag certain information. So this was filed last year, and one of my favorite things that they put in a complaint, it's called, when you file a lawsuit, it's called a complaint. They have the term parties. And every time I read parties, I'm like, okay, when, where, who's bringing the hookah, right? No, the parties are just who's filing what, So like I said, the party is the state of Missouri, state of Louisiana, and the federal government. And then of course, jurisdiction. The states, when the states sue the federal government, they have to go to the federal court. The state cannot sue the federal government in a state court. Why? Because the federal government said so, okay? The North won the war, right? So the federal government is very strong, right? And so the federalism rule is that if you sue the federal government, you have to go to the federal court. Now, if the federal court sues a state government, they don't have to go to the state court. They stay in the federal court, okay? So the federal government, to sue the federal government, you have to go to the federal government. So you sue the federal government in the federal government, and the federal government can sue the state in the federal government, okay? So that's where it's going. It's going in the federal government, and it's proceeding in the federal court in the state of Louisiana. That's where they wanted to file it. As long as the jurisdiction is proper in that venue, because a lot of this happened in the state of Louisiana. So as long as there's a lot of the activity happening, then the plaintiffs can basically choose where to start the case. And then the defendants could, in theory, try to have it moved to another venue if another venue is more convenient, or more witnesses or more facts happen there. Sometimes they could have it moved to a different venue. All right. So obviously they want to choose a state that's more friendly to them than so maybe if it's the federal government at the time, if they were all Democrats, right, like the president and all them. Try to, and there's the Republican attorney generals are suing them, then they're not going to go to New York or California. Do you see what I'm saying? Next order of business here. So what is going on and what are the allegations? What we have here is that the federal government was forcing and pressuring the social media companies like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, all of them. Okay. They were forcing them to label, to suppress speech. They were forcing them to ban accounts, to suppress articles, to kind of silence people. And one of the ways they would silence people is this thing called shadow banning, which is that they don't even tell you they're doing it. They just do something where then you don't appear. You just don't appear unless somebody knows you. They're already your friend or they're already your connection and they're coming to you. But otherwise, you don't appear. So they had all these ways of suppressing the information. Now I have said it so many times in previous episodes that private companies are allowed to do that. Okay, so Twitter is allowed to suppress anyone they want. For the most part, there's like some minor exceptions, like they can't choose, okay, we're going to stop allowing, Muslims to have, discussion boards just for the hell of it. So there's some protected classes that they can't just suppress for no reason, but they can suppress, other entities, right? Or people that they're saying, oh, these are lies or, these are fake accounts or something. So they're allowed to suppress speech. And what this lawsuit makes a good point in saying is that what's going on is that it's not the private companies that want to suppress speech. It's that they are being forced to suppress speech by the federal government. Okay, so it's like the federal government is not suppressing the speech directly. They're not let's say Joe Samo, the run it by my lawyer, And so it's not like the federal government sends a letter to Joe Samo saying, stop your run it by my lawyer podcast. OK, that's not what's happening. What's happening is they're pressuring Twitter to tell Joe Samo, or other people, stop that account from going. OK, so that is so it's a little bit different in the sense that, how it's all working. I think that I'm positive that if they can prove that the private companies acted, colluded with the federal government and they worked together, and then the private companies stopped the certain accounts because of what the federal government threatened them. That is a violation of free speech. That is just like the federal government. And there's a lot of there's some Supreme Court precedent saying things like that, because, we haven't had social media. It's not like the social media companies were around, not even Friendster or MySpace was around when the Constitution was enacted, right? So it's not like this is all kind of new things. So there's not that much precedent, but it's pretty clear that if these allegations are true, then the federal government will be liable for years of suppressing speech. Okay. All right. So let's, and then how it's going to come down is this. The theory is obviously, there are, the federal government can, let me see how to say this. There can be, protected speech is, any sort of political speech, religious speech, even business commercial speech is, it's less protected. But one thing that's not protected is protected is like pure falsehoods. Okay, so the government is allowed, if something is purely a lie or purely defamation or purely just inciting violence, right? There are, the Supreme Court has allowed the federal government to ban and state governments to ban that thing. So if you're inciting violence, but it has to be like imminent violence. If you're inciting imminent violence, or if you're, intentionally like spreading some sort of lie or falsehood out there, right? Like if you're sending out something saying, oh, if you don't start taking, more Tylenol, you're going to die tomorrow, or something weird like that. Okay. They're allowed to kind of stop that. Now, what the federal government said here is that, well, we wanted to suppress information about this COVID origin and about, the election fraud and everything because it's inciting, racism, or it's inciting violence, and it's all falsehoods, and it's, false information. All right. So this lawsuit makes it a point to say, no, those things were not falsehoods, meaning like they're not like pure, like completely false. It's not, if there's any sort of gray area, or it could be wrong, it could be right, then the government cannot suppress it. Okay. The theory in free speech is that you could have counter speech or, counter arguments coming in. But if something is questionable, even if it's only a little bit questionable, the government cannot suppress it on the theory that it's completely false. Okay. So like I said, this lawsuit makes it a point to say that. Okay. Then the idea, the counter speech is the free flow of ideas. And, that is what the First Amendment is supposed to protect and encourage, not to have the federal government stop this. Okay. Now let's get to the nitty gritty of the allegations. Okay. We start with, Hunter Biden's laptop. Okay. And I'll be the first to say, I'm not, the point of this lawsuit is the suppression of the news, not whether or not Hunter Biden had something illegal or, whatever. He communicated and he bribed somebody. It's the point is more about how the stories about his laptop got suppressed. Okay, so let me explain that. So what happened here is in October 14, 2020. October 14, my friend Ritesh's birthday. You better watch this. Okay, so here on that day, the New York Post ran a article, and the article explained this laptop issue that the Hunter Biden, who's President Biden's son, he had this laptop. He took it to a repair shop in Delaware, and it had all this information on it, and he forgot it there. And then eventually the repair shop, somehow they gave it it made its way to the News Post, right? And then the New York Post. Now the New York Post then, had an article about this, and in their article they stated that there was, like all of this information on the laptop, and some of it could be, that it shows that there was some sort of illegal business deals between the Biden family and these foreign governments, and that there was, and then all of this, that it could be proved from the information in the laptop. Okay, so that was the story that was published by the New York Post on its website and in the newspaper, in the I don't know if they still do a physical paper, but on their physical paper, if they had it back then, and on their website, they published a story. But I'll focus on the website one. So they published it on their website, and then obviously, how do you promote things? You then put the article on Twitter, Facebook, right? TikTok, and all of the above. And then New York Post, they have a lot of followers on Twitter. And what happened then is that, and I want to make sure I explain this correctly. Okay, there we go. Okay. So then President, it was actually, this was going on while he was the Democratic presidential candidate. So he and other top leading, Democrat officials. So this is a big deal because it was going to come out 2 weeks before the election between Biden and Trump. So 2 weeks before, or it did come out 2 weeks before. So the Biden campaign put a lot of pressure on Twitter and Facebook to hide that story. And what they did is they hid it. They actually blocked the New York Post's Twitter account, and they didn't allow people on Twitter to share that link. Okay, so they disabled the link. I don't. Obviously there's a lot of technology behind that, right? So they disabled the link. They locked the account for the New York Post, and so that story got suppressed. Okay, now keep in mind these are allegations, right? But this was filed about almost a year ago, and they have been gathering evidence, and the evidence, I've been following it. The evidence they gathered is very good. I mean, there were like clear communications between the Biden campaign and Twitter. There was clear communications. There was clear threats, and a lot of those threats were things like the social media companies. They have a lot of immunity to lawsuits for disinformation. So if Joe Samo is on YouTube and Twitter and everything, and if whatever, I have something false, I write down this lawsuit was filed on this day and whatever, I think this person's going to win or blah blah blah, and it turns out that I was like totally wrong, and because I was wrong, some company lost a lot of money, right? And so that company could sue me for putting things that were false, right? Or defaming them. But Twitter is not on the hook for that. Okay, it's like they're clear from that liability. So that's a federal law. It's called Section 230. Okay, that's the where it's enumerated. So what President Biden said, then candidate Biden, okay, and former vice president said, like, he threatened them, and it was all over the news and everything. He said, you know what, we should re-examine that immunity to these social media companies, and we should hold them liable for falsehoods and things like that. And he told them this, right? And so there you go. All of a sudden, right, they suppressed this whole story. And it's not like they suppressed the story. They didn't go and check out the laptop. They didn't fact check it like that. They didn't, interview people and stuff. They just hid it. They blocked it. Okay. And that's going to be difficult to say that they hid it and they blocked it for valid reasons. All right. And it seems pretty clear that there was at least some pressure from the, then presidential candidate Biden. Okay. Now, then the next one, this one is, okay, the lab leak. There was, especially in the beginning of COVID, right? There were a lot of stories about how COVID started, right? Because everyone was pissed off and everyone wanted to know, how did this start? Okay. So there was basically the two biggest theories. Okay. The bat. How did that bat get in here, dude? There's the bat theory. Oh my God, get it. Wow. Woo. Dodged the bullet there. Okay, so there was the bat theory, okay, where there was some bat in China that was eaten at a market or something, and that's what started COVID. And that story came out immediately, right? And then there was another, genre of stories that said, you know what? There was a lab, and this must have been in a lab or a research facility, and it got leaked out of there, whether it was intentional or just by accident. I mean, there was then, these are the two big stories. Obviously, I'm summarizing, there's a lot of nuances or different, ways of saying it. Maybe one says, oh no, it wasn't, it was a bat, but it was eaten, a long time ago, or blah, 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 or maybe it was some other animal. Some of the stories were, oh, this was intentional. Some of it was leaked on accident, blah, blah, blah. Right. And, and then there was obviously other stories, whatever, aliens came down to, whatever. But those were the two big stories, right? And somehow the media, social media companies immediately censored the lab leak stories, okay? And then so the attorney generals for Missouri and Louisiana are going after the federal government, saying that the federal government was pressuring the social media companies to stop those theories. Okay, and there's all the best evidence is that the federal government just admitted. I mean, they admitted this when President Biden, his then communication press secretary Jennifer Pulaski. I mean, she straight said over and over, we are working with the social media companies to make sure they don't spread misinformation about this lab theory of how COVID originated. So that's pretty good evidence. What did you say? That's good evidence right there, right? So it's the federal government. She is the federal government, and she admitted that they were doing this. Okay, saying the word admitted is kind of weird because then it's always like, oh, they admitted it, you know. She stated that they were doing this, okay? So now, and then there are emails and letters and communications from Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci was the federal government to Facebook saying, no, this isn't how it happened. That would be disinformation, and it didn't start this way, and all of that. And this lawsuit, they just won a court hearing that will allow them to take Dr. Fauci's deposition so they could get even more information. Obviously, that may be appealed and whatever, but for now, they're allowed to take Dr. Fauci's deposition and some other of these federal officials. So what we have here is, the federal government was clearly telling them to stop this, okay? And what I want to, it wasn't, I don't want to give the impression that it was just like the federal government saying, hey, we don't think this is accurate, so why don't you stop it? That wasn't, it was more threatening than that. And I'll explain, I said previously, this thing about the Section 230, there was a lot of then exact examples where the federal government was saying, well, if they keep spreading this, we are going to take away their immunity. Okay, it wasn't the Republicans that were saying that, according to this lawsuit. It was President Biden, Vice President Harris, Nancy Pelosi. Okay, so here we go. In a very common one, I'm going to quote this: Defendant Biden, his political allies, and those acting in concert with him have a long history of threatening to use official government authority to impose adverse legal consequences against social media companies. And they were, right? And one thing that the Biden said was that during his campaign, he said, I am going to use my federal authority to stop, to get rid of this immunity if they keep spreading disinformation. So he said he was going to do this, and then he did do it, and then they did stop that information, right? Okay, so then Senator Harris, Kamala Harris, who obviously became the vice president in 2019, she said, look, let's be honest, Donald Trump's Twitter account should be suspended. And then she said, time to do something about this, about tweets from President Trump. And as we know, after Joe Biden won the election, guess what? President Trump, who was spreading these COVID theories and election fraud theories and whatnot, Twitter suspended the sitting president's Twitter account, right? Now, that's crazy. Like, I don't know. I remember when this happened, how does a social media site suspend the president? Like, wow. Okay. And then I was telling people, well, they're allowed to, and they are allowed to because they're a private entity. So if they think President Trump is full of nonsense, they are allowed to suspend him. God bless them. They're a private company. I've said that over and over. Private companies are allowed to do that. And again, this lawsuit makes a good point of saying, they are allowed to do that, but who's not allowed to do that is then President-elect Joe Biden and President-elect Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. they are not allowed to pressure Twitter to suspend his account. Okay, so it's those, because if it wasn't for that pressure, then Twitter probably wouldn't have suspended his account. So that one may have to be proved at trial, and it's probably not going to be too hard to prove at trial because there's going to be Twitter executives. I believe they've already said, yes, that factored a big deal into getting rid of his account. The fact that the newly elected president and all these other high-ranking officials kept telling us we have to stop President Trump from tweeting, right? Okay. So let's keep going. The next order of business. Now, this one, it makes the lawsuit says, they said, well, no thanks for, what's it called? Suppressing this information about the lab leak theory of COVID. Because what happened is after 2020, 2021 and in 2022, all of this evidence started coming out that it's possible that it wasn't that freaking bat that caused COVID, that it may have started in the lab, right? And then all of a sudden, the social media company, after the federal government started, couldn't suppress it as much, so to speak, then the social media companies were then allowed to, and then they allowed their users to start spreading the news. There's a song, right? Start spreading the news. They allowed the Twitter users to, start spreading the news that maybe COVID started in a lab, right? And this lawsuit makes it a point that said, well, the federal government hindered free speech, and because of that, those theories that should be analyzed and there was like scientific evidence of this and that, the fact that was suppressed, then the truth took longer to come out. Do you see what I'm saying? So they're saying that, like, indeed, there's like direct damage to the U.S. people. Okay, they have a lot of good evidence here, and then they even have evidence of like CNN journalists that then started saying, we can't rule that out. We're not sure where it started. Things like that. Where and then once that theory came out, like I said, it was allowed. Okay, the next one that was suppressed. And now, by the way, it's the federal government, in addition to them saying, well, it was probably false information, they were concerned about racism, right? Because if those articles were allowed to get out there, COVID started in a lab in China, right? Then there would be a lot more racism and against Asian Americans, right? So they were trying to protect some of that, but that's not a valid reason to suppress speech. You can only suppress it if it's obviously a lie, or if it's like imminent, like something like, hey, this is this person's address. Let's all meet there and kill them at 2 p.m. They can suppress that, right? Okay. The next one is that the federal government was pressuring Twitter and Facebook to suppress evidence about the efficacy of the masks, the mask mandates. There were a lot of doctors, okay, that were saying these masks, they shouldn't be required. They shouldn't be required in schools. They shouldn't be required in public, blah, blah, blah. And even YouTube, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, he put out in his YouTube page, he put up a video, and it was Ron DeSantis. He had a video about claims that children don't need to wear masks at schools, right? And YouTube suspended that video in April 2021. And same with Senator Rand Paul had a YouTube video that was explaining, and through medical evidence that he had or that he acquired or whatever, that these masks weren't working. And then YouTube kicked that one out. And these are senators and a governor, right? So it's not like, if they ban Joe Samo, okay, fine. But senators and governors, right? And there's evidence again of the federal government telling Google to ban these, right? To ban these videos. And this lawsuit also makes it a point to say, even during that time, there was conflicting evidence as to the efficacy of mask mandates, right? So that they didn't have the authority to ban that speech that said that these mask mandates don't work. Okay. And then the same thing with lockdowns. There were these videos and disputes about the efficacy of lockdowns. They were all being banned, and then they stopped being banned eventually when doctors came out and said, you know what, we're not sure about the efficacy of lockdowns and masks. Okay. Speech about election integrity and the security of voting by mail. This one is very, very bad. Okay, I'm gonna explain why. After the election, when obviously, as we all know, President Trump went all everywhere saying it was fraud. It was there. I should have won. Blah blah blah. Right? Okay, cool. Then he was spreading that on Twitter, right? And he was like YouTube video, everything. A lot of people were spreading all these videos and YouTube clips and Twitter accounts. The election was biased and or not biased, but there was wrong counting and all that jazz, right? Then the social media sites started banning that. Okay, and what came out, what this lawsuit shows is there was direct evidence of the federal government telling the social media companies, stop this, stop letting Twitter do, or they would tell Twitter. In 2021, the federal government stated, this is Jennifer Pasecki again, the press speaker. So we're working with them. She's talking about social media companies. We're working with the tech companies that are the platform for much of the disinformation that reaches the American public, how they can better use the terms to really strengthen the legitimate use of the very powerful platforms. She has said that in response to, why are you telling these companies to stop the election misinformation? Okay. The federal government, this is about the COVID one, they were directly involved. This is the federal government saying that in flagging COVID-19 misinformation, and that the COVID-19 related activities seek to undermine public confidence and sow confusion. And that rapid evolution of the accurate information makes older, dated information, not relevant. Okay, so and then this one with the election one, this makes it a very good point, and this is kind of this will be very nerve-wracking for the attorneys representing the federal government. What happened was they were suppressing speech of the voting, integrity of the voting of the 2020 election. But what they didn't suppress was there was previous reports, like before 2020. There was, there were these committees, and like, for example, in 2012, there was, the New York Times wrote so there was other senators and other kind of public think tanks and government officials that they've always checked voter fraud, right? So in 2012, they had said, the Democrats said that there could be, we're concerned about some absentee ballots and that there could be fraud with absentee ballots. And then there was a Washington Post article in 2012 that said, yeah, the government officials are concerned about absentee ballots. Okay. In 2014, MSNBC claimed, indeed, election experts say absentee ballot fraud is the most common fraud. Okay. All of those have, there was like President Carter, he had a commission on federal election reform, and it showed kind of like errors in mail voting, not mail in voting. All right. And then in 2017, the federal election officials had certain things that they were concerned about. So anyway, long story short, all of those reports and everything were never censored, right? And it wasn't until what happened after 2020 and 2021, all of a sudden Joe Biden and the federal government started suppressing that information. And they were suppressing it, saying it's false, it's creating conflict. It's getting people to act violently. There was that January 6th insurrection, and it was all based on Donald Trump's nonsense. But there were all these other articles that were not suppressed, and they never were. And they still kind of like let those articles stay there about the potential problems with elections. So it's going to be it is an interesting lawsuit. I think, where do we go from here? The Missouri and Louisiana have dedicated a lot of money to keep this going and to, obtain more evidence showing. I think it's pretty clear that the federal government did pressure these companies to stop this. They admitted to it. So then the question will be, are there going to be judges, and it may go to the Supreme Court, that then say that was illegal and that violated the First Amendment? Holy moly. If it did violate the First Amendment, then the federal government could be on the hook for, having all this like information, potentially true information be delayed, or they could be on the hook for not letting speech get to people in the time that, it should have gotten to people. All right. It's going to be a great lawsuit. And like I always say, a lot of lawyers are going to make a lot of money on this. All right. Good stuff, my friends. I'll see you next week.